Okay, guys, so we're still talking about data here. In this one, we're going to talk about objects. There's going to be a lot thrown at you in this one because objects, although the concept is the same in just about every language, the way that every language approaches this concept is very different. The semantics is different, the syntax is different. There's definitely, every language has their own flavor of objects, but conceptually speaking, they all have some way of making associative lists, and that's pretty much what an object is. It's an associative. It can be thought of as an associative array. So what does that mean? So here's an example. We have this list right here. This is just an array, but we don't really know what this means, right? Math does not speak for itself. Numbers, excuse me, data does not speak for itself. So we need some way of relating this to the real world. How can we do that? So let's say that these numbers actually represent the results in a contest. So we'll say, well, I won, of course. And then good old Tim, he came in second in this contest of, I don't know, being a smart aleck. Tony. Drex, crazy name. Kid named Drex. That sounds like a kid who beats up other kids in the bathroom. Never heard of a kid named Drex getting bullied. It's like a kid who bullies other kids. So this is basically an object. It's an associative array. I've basically associated the value of, for instance, Alex and Tim and Tony with these numbers here. And if I wanted to access that, here's how I would do it. In the last video we talked about, well, how could I get the values from an array, and we just use the indexes, right? But in this one, we've created a custom index. So I can actually just type in Alex inside this bracket system, this bracket notation, and it will come back with 1. So this is a good way to approach it. In just about every language, this will get you the value you're looking for. This bracket notation is pretty universally accepted as a way of retrieving information from inside of an object. JavaScript has a couple of cool features that not all other languages have this. I actually don't need to specify that this is a string because JavaScript is going to automatically save these keys as a string. So if I wanted to, something cool about JavaScript, this is not going to be the same as every language, this particular feature. I could actually just do .alex, and it will grab that same thing. It will grab that same value from inside that object. So I can put anything I want inside of these things. I can put the number of kids that Drex has beat up. He probably beat me up. Kid named Drex, cool name like that. I can actually put another object in here if I wanted to. This is what's called a nested object. Put a giant number. Nope, sorry, that's not a number. I could put a whole paragraph of text. I could put anything I want inside of this thing and have it associated with some sort of key value pair, and that's very important. That's a good way of looking at this. Every object has a sort of key value pair. And so these are called keys, and this is the value of that key. And objects, like for instance in JavaScript, there's this universal class you can access called object. And I can actually get the keys of this object by doing this as follows. Now this is the class. This is a function that this class has, and classes are a little bit more complex. We'll get into that later. It's just that classes are basically just blueprints. They're ways of structuring functions and other, uh, sometimes they're called methods as well. We'll get into that later. It's a little more complex. Don't want to throw too much at you at once. But this might be something good just to jot down. This is something that's used all the time. So if I want to just get the keys from inside of this object, I can run this. It's going to actually return every key as a string, which is what they're automatically saved as. If I want to get the values, do the same thing there. Just type values there, and it will actually come back with, inside of an array, the values from each one of these keys. So that's how they approach it in JavaScript, but here's where it's going to sort of get confusing. Not every language approaches this the same way. For instance, Python doesn't even call it an object. They call it a dictionary. They still use curly brackets. They won't let you use just normal keys. You have to specify that it's a string. They use colons, and they have the values as well. So I'm just going to show you. This comes back as class dict, which stands for dictionary. Somewhat of a different approach. Same deal though. If I wanted to get the value of key, like I said, this is a pretty safe way of getting it in every language. Most languages have this sort of bracket notation there. You can get that value of 1. Ruby, because Ruby has to be so different. Here's something that sort of frustrates me with Ruby. Sorry, I'm just going to call this object. They also use these same brackets, these curly braces here, but yeah, I'll show you. So Ruby's got a couple different ways of approaching this, and it's very different, probably the most different of all the languages I know. So I can actually do this right here. I can do it this way. This is what's called a symbol in Ruby, and it's just a key. It's just a key. If I wanted to, I could do it like this. Here's the thing, Ruby's kind of versatile in this sense. I could also do this. I could also do this. So it's like if you were more familiar with using colons instead of these arrows, I could do colon. And this will also revert it to a symbol. Just like that. So it's just a different way of approaching it, but here's what really sort of frustrates me about Ruby. They call this a hash. And that doesn't make sense to me, because it's not really what hash means, is it? A dish of cooked meat? Well, it's definitely not that. Anyway, I just don't think this is the right word for it. You hear the word hash a lot in encryption and security, but like this just doesn't seem like a hash to me at all. It doesn't. Just a weird semantic thing they did there. It's an object. That's what it is conceptually. PHP's got a somewhat different approach to this as well. So in PHP, they do not use curly brackets for associative arrays. PHP is also kind of different in this approach. We'll get into some of the differences here. So I can actually use associative arrays. I can just use normal brackets. But in PHP, they like arrows in PHP. PHP likes arrows for a lot of things. I have to have a semicolon there. Jeez. So there we go, we got 1. So this is technically still an array inside of PHP, but it works like an object as an associative array. So if I did it comes back as an array. But like I said, pretty much works like an object. PHP has this other thing though that's really weird. Honestly, it's also got a really weird name. What is it called? It's called STD class. Where is a new? How do I find? Did I do this earlier? Yeah, I did. I'm just gonna call this. So I have this weird thing called STD class, which horrid naming, the worst name ever for anything. But here's another way of assigning things. And this concept's pretty similar. But instead of dots, like JavaScript, in JavaScript when I did this, I had a key in there that was called key. I could just use a dot notation to get the key I wanted. Instead of dots, PHP likes arrows. You don't really see dots much in PHP. You don't see periods, so we use arrows. So I can actually assign a key this way. So if I print this now, come back. Well, first of all, it'll come back like this. Now we get an object. This comes back as an object. Their new STD class is of type object. And although this associative array will do just about everything you need it to do to basically map key value pairs and associative arrays, these special objects in PHP have other properties that allow for some more complex logic. I know that, for instance, I know there's a sort of mapping function you can do, like you can call map. Actually, I'm not going to get more into that. That's a little bit more complex, but basically just understand that this has just different properties than just your normal object. It's like a super object, if that makes sense. So I can't actually print this. Can I do this? Yes, okay, so it comes back as object, and we now have a key associated with the string. This is a value. And that's something else I'm going to touch on here real quick. We'll go back to JavaScript to handle that, because PHP is too weird. Let's say I have an object, and I want to assign something to it. Let's say I have another thing, another variable up here. Geez, type. I can actually do this. Well, I can do it this way if I wanted to. I could do key equals boom. So I've assigned a key to this is the value. I could also do this. It will now assign Alex to a value just by using this dot notation. So that's a way you could run through and add things to objects as well without having to list every single one inside of these brackets. So guys, I think that pretty much covers objects for now. This can get a little bit more complex. This is something you're going to have to get used to, something you're going to have to just familiarize yourself more and more with as you interact with them. But they're extremely useful, and they're used all over the place, and you can do some incredible things with them. I mean, crap, like things like view and stuff run on some of the cool properties of objects, So very useful, can get complex, but really a lot of times it's just a way of organizing data. It's a good way of putting it. All right, guys, hope you learned something.